Patlabor is a mixed media franchise almost since the beginning, having plenty of supplementary material to quench the thirst of anyone who claims to be a fan in the late 80s to early 90s, though the most notable entries in the franchise both in Japan and overseas are definitely the movies. Patlabor 1 was a hard sci-fi tale which roughly followed the established formula of Patlabor at the time, where the team must solve a mystery and save Tokyo from the possibility of mass destruction at the hands, or manipulators, that built it. Patlabor 2 is a political thriller that commentates on the geopolitics of Japan and the people that live there, somewhat of a departure from the previous entries in tone and story. Then there's the third in the trilogy, not as highly regarded as the first two, and is often seen as the black sheep of the franchise. Reviews are generally mixed, some disappointed with the direction the story takes. I myself have my own opinions on WXIII, though I'll set aside my biases for this video to take a critical look at this film and the manga arc that inspired its production. We'll figure out if WXIII really is a waste of your time. The entire story begins in 1995 when Yutaka Izubuchi wanted to make a story based on the manga arc, similarly to how on television based its second season on the Griffin arc. A funny little detail since I already brought up TV, there's many monster episodes in the anime, however one specific episode has a strong resemblance to the manga arc, episode 19, Shadow and Geofront. The actual setting and monster do feel pretty similar to the episode, and the first instance of WXIII appearing in the manga technically happened 3 months after the episode had aired. Not just that, but it turns out Izubuchi was the one who wrote the episode, which is funny because it's the only episode he ever wrote for TV, though there's also the episode in Early Days which is a Godzilla parody and is similar to the actual story and the manga arc in the movie. Anyways, tangent aside, WXIII was originally planned as a spin-off OVA two-parter, with Nori Takayama being the director instead of Oshii. The entire idea of it being a spin-off that didn't focus on Section 2 came from how Oshii kind of wrapped Patlabor up with Patlabor 2. The second movie was a send-off film at the time, and I guess it'd be a little too soon to do a return to status quo. Because of this decision, it ended up turning into a film with a lot of everyday shots. According to Toei, they couldn't do much else with it. Other films had action and hijinks spaced out across the movies, but 3 has more slow-moving scenes of the setting and characters. It was definitely a tough movie to make. They all needed to brainstorm ideas on how to properly flesh it out. The first draft would be completed in either 1998 or 1999. Tori Miki, Yutaka Izubuchi, and Takayama Fumihiko had varying opinions on monster films, and it definitely influenced the end result. Trying to figure out what the film was going to be wasn't the only hurdle faced in development, as the animation studio who originally handled WXIII, Triangle Staff, went defunct mid-production, leaving Madhouse to pick it up where they left off. With that, the movie would finally release March 30th of 2002. For this next part, I'll go over the basic plot progression of the movie while comparing it to Waste Container number 13, as well as Strike Back, the volumes where the arc originates. Afterwards, I'll go over why I think people like or dislike the film, and my own thoughts as well. With that being said, let's get into it. The film opens up with this operator of the fishing boat seeing a plane crash into the waters below, dropping something into the water. Soon we're introduced to our main characters, Shinichiro Hata and Takeshi Kasumi, the detective duo that we'll be following for the rest of the film. The plane crash is just one of the cases they'll be hopping onto after seeing the gruesome scene left after. Meanwhile in the manga, the story occurs directly after the Castle Gate battle with the Griffin. Just like the movie, it starts with a plane crash, but instead of the witness being the crew of a fishing boat, it's planning Section 7, the ones who operate the Griffin. After the Griffin had crashed into the bay, they had lost the Osir unit, which is basically the Griffin's main operating system, and they are now searching for it in the depths of the bay. In the middle of their search, they run into a US Navy battleship, and when they send in divers to find the Asura, they're pulled in by something. They have 3 months to find the Asura before the signal finally gives out. In the movie, Shinichiro picks up a woman with car trouble, taking her to the university where she works as a professor. She also lugs this large case around too. Very curious. At a police department meeting, it's noted that all laborers working along the shoreline were attacked at night, and they all just so happened to be shaft-made. After the meeting, Kasumi and Shinichiro begin asking around for any leads to figure out what was even going on. The only thing of note they get is information about abnormally large gobies that appeared 10 days after the crash. From that point, Kasumi kinda just hands the case to Shinichiro. At Todo Biotech, Miyanomori and Kurisu just met these guys in suits, then going on to talk about how number 12 doesn't have much longer to live. In the manga, Colonel Packager of the US Army wanted to use a battleship to aid in the search for 13. Nishiwaki, Miyanomori, and Kurisu are concerned about the crash and don't want 13 to be found by the police. The other specimens like 12 lived short lives, though if 13 survived the crash, it'd take just 3 months for it to walk on land. There's also reports of fish growing abnormally large, likely due to the meta-albumin, the main substance for the cultivation fluid, in the containers for the waste numbers. Section 2 also begins patrol cycles, which makes planning Section 7's search more difficult. In the movie, 2 people here are investigating an underwater cable using a remote control sub, though it ends up being attacked. Unlike the other labors, this one is Hishi made. Later, it's also revealed that a company called Hermes had a container on the ship. Though when our 2 detectives investigate a Hermes-owned property, they come up short. Later, Saiko Misaki, the woman Shinichiro picked up, is holding a lecture about cancer and telomerase. Shinichiro would pay her a visit, and this is where their relationship would start to blossom. Afterwards, while watching a news report, Kasumi suspects a military presence surrounding the case, believing that one of the containers on the plane has something to do with the crash. They have a deaf person try to lip read from the recording, and she mentions something about a baker's dozen. A couple visits the club nearby a maintenance base, and the girl is horrified at a bloody mess in the car next to them. Back to the manga, Noah and Asuma investigate the power loss from a nearby maintenance base, encountering a large monster destroying Chaldeas and attacking Unit 1. Noah uses up all of her ammo fighting it, and shoots at it point blank in the head, causing it to run off. We're told that it was shipped off after larval stage, meaning that it was a predator by the time of the crash. It was cultivated using human cancer cells, something suggested by Nishiwaki. The origins of the waste numbers likely coming from an amino acid under the ice in the South Pole 20 years ago. The police department labels the incident as a terrorist attack for the time being, all while Goto meets with Professor Furuyanagi, aka the father of the modern labor system, and he talks about the Griffin and the Asura. Goto would then discuss the origins of the Asura with Shinobu. Meanwhile in the movies, they have their own encounter with the beast in question, who has already devoured most of security and goes on a man-eating rampage as Shinichiro and Kasumi try to escape. One of its body parts gets caught under a shutting door, and the detectives manage to make the monster fall onto one of the laborers and into the waters below. Just like the manga, the police call it a terrorist attack for the time being, all while the tissues from the monster is being sent to 3 different institutes for analysis, with Toto being one of the chosen places. In the movie, we learn that Saiko Misaki had a late husband, which is where the name change comes from. She also had a daughter named Hitomi, who would be relevant later. Kasumi would discuss the recent events with Goto, who would explain that the plane was headed for the US-owned Marshall Islands, where lots of experimentation and testing is done across various different military bases. He'd also point out that all the laborers attacked belonged to Shaft, and even though one of the later ones happened to be owned by Hishi, it used a Shaft superconducting motor. In the manga, Planning Section 7 dies for the Asura again, but it supposedly changes location. In the midst of the confusion, the Siren gets attacked, giving them more trouble. Meanwhile, news about the monster leaks to the public, and if it becomes too much of a problem, it can harm local businesses and tourism in the Bay Area. Noah and Asuma were questioned about what they saw at the base, and after seeing the bodies of the victims, they take up the job to take down the monster, possibly with the help of the JSDF. At Toto, it's observed that 13's weaker cells are absorbed by the stronger ones to stay alive, so they plan on using 12's frozen bone marrow to make a time bomb. Nishiwaki disavows of this and plans to feed 13 more albumin, wanting to continue her father's waste research. At this point in the movie, the piece of the monster analyzed by Kazusa Labs likely broke free and started killing the researchers there. The police had no choice but to reveal that there is indeed a monster lurking about. We're told that Nishiwaki trophin, a substance originally found in the Arctic meteorite, was used to create Nishiwaki cells, which can divide at tremendous speeds. Coupled with the fact that Misaki admits using human cancer cells makes 13's resilience very clear. Misaki also refers to 13 as a child, which is also important later. 13 should not have lived this long, and they didn't inject a time bomb either. The two detectives meet with the Todo scientist, and Kasumi name-dropping Hermes accidentally solidified their connection to the case, thanks to Miyamoto's reaction. Back to the manga, SB2 gets a report from all the institutes saying the same thing. In 1984, Junichi Nishiwaki of Todo cultivated a fast-growing Nishiwaki cell. These cells are similar to those of the monster. Unfortunately, Junichi died of cancer 10 years ago. Coincidentally, Todo is also slow on giving new information. When Division 2 is preparing for their upcoming confrontation, they're mysteriously told not to engage with the monster head-on. Eventually, Division 1 encounters the monster and also gets in the way of planning for the 7th's recovery once more. Division 2 finally receives a report from Todo, explaining that due to 13's cells being able to replicate as quickly as they do with adequate nutrition, attacking and scattering the cells would be ill-advised. In the movie, the detective duo are at Kasumi's home. Earlier, Kasumi notes that he saw someone leaving the Nishiwaki family grave. He believes it to be the chief researcher Saiko Misaki of Todo Biotech, suspecting Shinichiro of having a close relationship with her due to his defensive nature of her innocence in the case. This leaves Shinichiro to volunteer to go find her. Meanwhile, Todo finally prepares a warhead to break down 13's cellular structure, and this is when Colonel Goro Ishihara removes Kurisu from the equation by sending him to Florida. After Shinichiro visits Misaki's apartment only to find a large image of her daughter, more details about the case come to surface. At Club Babylon, where the couple were killed, they used analog records instead of CDs. They told me it was Misaki's daughter who died of cancer, and Misaki gives Shinichiro a tape through her parents that is of Hitomi playing the piano. The tape plays at a uniquely high frequency, and last but not least, Nishiwaki Trophin was found in the giant goby. In the manga, someone killed all the T-cells that were going to be used to create the time bomb. Nishiwaki claimed responsibility and accused Kurisu of seizing her father's research, all to create bioweapons for the United States military. She wants Kurisu to admit that he took her father's research and twisted it into something it wasn't. She also refers to 13 as her father's bastard son. Wink wink. Division 2 is tasked with keeping the monster in the water while the GSDF confine it with an electric fence. Thinking of ways to kill the monster, the US military states they still had T-cells they could use to create a warhead. The time bomb will be given to Section 2, but its potency isn't guaranteed. After it's delivered, they begin the fusion process, though the Americans start seizing all the records of the waste projects in exchange. Kurosaki would also be readying the Griffin, as it was slightly modified for his use so they could retrieve the Yasura much easier. In the movie, the Colonel states they have a single warhead with a virus, and SB2 will be tasked with launching it. Using the newly acquired knowledge of high frequencies attracting 13, they use the Ryujin to lure it to the stadium. It's a confined space where they won't have to worry about the cells scattering. Shinichiro finally locates Misaki and questions her involvement with 13. As this is happening, the Ryujin has trouble turning off the sound while 13 catches up. They try separating the two, but the monster easily breaks through the gates. The Ryujin gets stuck and they have to stop its speaker using an RPG. Meanwhile, Misaki states that she gave him the tape not only because Shinichiro reminded her of her husband, but also because he could have stopped her. Back to the manga, they try to get 13's attention, but it's aware of their intimidation tactics. The electric fence keeps it in place, but the voltage could stimulate its T-cells, 13 already regenerating from the attack. Nishiwaki then arrives and jumps into the waters to get 13's attention so it can escape. The two tries to hold it back while one of the soldiers rescue her. Unfortunately, 13 breaks through the gate and escapes, and Nishiwaki is knocked unconscious from the stun. As they try and plan around the situation, Kurosaki arrives in the Griffin and recovers the Asura, sinking a ship in the process. Goto tells Noah to get a hold of herself after she demands they pursue it, and they are finally given the warheads. They make the connection to the sound frequencies attracting the monster, so they acquire the Nautilus to draw 13 to their very own reclaimed land, as is the perfect location for attack. In the movie, 13 is led onto the land using sounds emitted from the AOL-43s. This is where Misaki clarifies her motivation, using her daughter's cancer cells to create 13, and Shinichiro doesn't like the fact that she treats it as some sort of replacement for her daughter. Misaki then goes on to watch as the Ingrams take on the monster, the stadium speakers playing the original piano song Hitomi played to attract it. This part is loosely similar to the monster, with the mechanics simulating the frequencies on top of the station house to attract 13. Oda fires a shot into 13's head, but the warhead goes right through, so he's left to pry the armor off and allow Noah to shoot into its center of mass to put it down for good. The movie has Oda actually firing the shot into its mouth and finally putting an end to its terror. Seeing this, Misaki just lets herself fall off one of the steel beams and Shinichiro catches her. While this is happening, the military arrives and burns 13 alive, as this was the original plan the entire time. Misaki slips and falls to her death, whereas in the manga she just lost 8 years worth of her memories from the blunt force trauma. In the manga, the monster escapes back into the water, but days later they see its detached arm on the shore. Eventually, they'd see the entire monster in a dry and dead state, which confirms that the bomb did indeed go off. The movie also ends with Shinichiro at the family grave and Kasumi chilling with Goto with some popsicles. That was basically the abridged version of these stories. There's a lot more details in both that I didn't go over for the sake of time, but these give you a rough idea of the plot progressions for both. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about why this movie is seen as the way it is. First, I'll give the movie the credit it deserves before I state why people may not like it. The movie looks beautiful. Like I said before, it was one of the last movies to use cell animation for the era of Digipaint. Lots of detail went into the background art and mechanical design. It still upholds the gold standard of visuals that the preceding movies offered before. I also like to think that Shaft Labor's Attraction 13 is a callback to Shaft Planets of the Sevens trying to receive the Asura. And while it's a meaningless speculatory idea, I like to imagine that the AOL-43's design is loosely based on the Asura itself. The movie was also really great at foreshadowing what exactly was going on. Like, the Baker's doesn't come when referring to 13, as Baker's dozen is 13 instead of 12. The theater performance foreshadowed Misaki's inner turmoil, and her lecture explained 13's abnormal regenerative capabilities. The tragedy of Misaki's story is, dare I say, more compelling as a narrative in comparison to Nishiwaki's. Not to discredit the manga, but seeing as the grief from losing her child not only explains her apathy towards 13's man-eating rampages, but also explains her protective nature over it. In the manga, she simply wants to avenge her father's research because of it being used for dubious purposes. Both are fine motivations, but the movie does give her more of an appealing characterization. The music is also pretty good, of course, who other than Kenji Kawai. It also adds to the vibes and atmosphere of the detailed environments we see the characters traverse. The entire world just feels completely diverse, natural, and lived in. This is one of the stronger points of the movie in my opinion. I'm also a sucker for how of the era the technology is. Look at this radio and tell me it doesn't ooze early 2000s. This along with the computers are just really alluring to me. I wasn't born around the time to experience this era of the internet, but I still find an appreciation for its more adolescent portrayal. This movie is a bit of a time capsule in a way, which gives it more points in my book. Of course, this is just the positives. When it comes to Patlabor 3, the main point of contention comes from its lack of Division 2. If you were to watch the movie trilogy, you can tell that they are represented less and less as you go from movie to movie. It's not a secret that this movie tries to distance itself from what we associate with Patlabor normally. At the beginning, it's made clear that this won't be a Division 2 story, Kasumi cutting Shinichiro off after he mentions the idea of including them on the case. The JST have tackled the containment of 13 before Division 2 does, rather than simply supporting them like they do in the manga. They do show up at the end, but even after their efforts to stop the monster, the military arrives to burn it alive anyways. Their presence overall was just unneeded, their inclusion in the film only being there to include Patlabor in the title. This was 8 years after the second movie, and 7 after the manga. I wouldn't put it past someone to see that there was finally more Patlabor coming out on the big screen, but disappointed that the main characters felt more like cameos than anything. The movie also carries the tone similar to the second, a more moodier movie that's less comical than the first movies and OVAs. However, it goes a step further and includes actual blood and gore. The monster eats people alive and you can see the blood dripping from 13's mouth. It's a bit of a departure from what Patlabor normally is, that as well as the scene near the end, if you know what I'm talking about. Misaki's fate was also made more tragic too. Originally, she was supposed to be caught by the Ingram and simply just lose her memories like the manga. But as you see in the movie, she falls to her death. But the thing is, isn't that the point though? Izubushi did want to make something that wasn't just Patlabor. Something similar to the monster films he appreciated in his younger years. Time and time again they do mention the fact that Patlabor is a media project. It can do what it wants and cover a lot of bases in setting and plot structure. This was just one of the other takes on the franchise. Well, here are my actual thoughts on the movie. For a movie, Wasted 13 is pretty good. I can see how someone could get enjoyment out of it, but as a Patlabor film, it's hard to give it the credit it seeks out. The argument of it being good in a vacuum can only do so much. When you start to stray far from the scope, it kind of starts to lose its identity. If you cut out all the scenes involving anything SV2, you'll still have the same movie. But if you did this with the first or second movie, you're cutting out really important parts of the movie that give them their identities. It's easy to understand the intention to make something more unique, but from the audience's standpoint, when they see Patlabor, they're going to expect Patlabor. But let's respect the vision here. This is a spin-off, so it's not entirely fair to hold it to mainline standards. Though, in this case, there's another issue I have with the film. We follow two characters, Takeshi Kasumi and Shinichiro Haza. Two detectives, one senior experienced one, and one younger go-getter one. It's fine to want to introduce new characters, but with the context of other media like the movie and the manga, their inclusion feels more like a way to distance itself more from Patlabor, if you know what I mean. If you've read the manga, you know that one of the first characters we're introduced to is Kazamori, who is Matsui's detective partner who investigates the Griffin incident in the manga. These two easily could have been the protagonists of the film. I'm sure there'd be a lot more enthusiasm for these two characters getting the spotlight. The dynamics of the detective duos aren't too different. Matsui's older age and experience, as well as Kazamori's youth and ardent behavior, are already established. Kazamori also has that hopeless romantic thing going on between him and Noah. It would have been perfect for him to grow a fondness for Misaki in the film, because we already know he isn't above romantically pursuing women. Matsui also calls him out on it too, just like Kasumi does with Shinichiro in the film. Potentially, this film would have felt more familiar to Patlabor fans without having to sacrifice the goal of distancing itself away from Division 2. Personally, it took me a few rewatches to get some sort of appreciation for the work, and part of it comes from what it could have been. Of course, like with the identity stuff I mentioned before, I'm not a fan of it perpetuating the idea of Patlabor being a lot more moodier than it is. That's a personal gripe, and you're free to disagree. But I've seen so many people surprised to figure out that Patlabor is more of a chill comedy more than a serious thriller drama. I know Patlabor can be anything, yes, but I think this tone specifically was what Headgear was trying to avoid when coming up with the concept of the franchise. In conclusion, WXIII holds up on its own, but as a Patlabor film, it's a little weird to get behind. I think the people who enjoy this film the most are those who don't really have a strong connection to what is Patlabor, quote unquote. And I don't mean this in a negative or antagonistic way. What I mean is that they won't be as bothered by the film's standalone departure nature than people who have more of an investment in the franchise. Where a bigger fan would be left wanting, others will be perfectly satisfied with Patlabor as a backdrop. I'm one of those people who have a bigger investment in the franchise, so I don't like the movie as much as I would have wanted to. If all the detail and care that went into this film went into something more Patlabor, I feel like the franchise would have left a stronger lasting legacy during the great drought period before the Next Generation, Reboot, and soon Easy Y, or Easy. But that's enough of that. If you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, and I'll be seeing ya.